Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet drift into the softer corners of history. This is Sleepy Historian, boring history for sleep, where stories move slowly, voices stay gentle, and the past unfolds at the pace of your breath. If this kind of calm storytelling helps you find rest, or if you've fallen asleep to history before, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if it helps you sleep a little easier. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. There's a quiet comfort in knowing how many of us are drifting through the same shadows of the past together. So dim the lights, get comfortable, let the world settle. Tonight, we travel back to the Qing Dynasty, a vast empire of scholars, lanterns, silk robes, and silent confidence. An empire that never imagined its fall would come, not from armies or earthquakes, but from a simple flower. Imagine narrow streets in Canton, sweet smoke curling through wooden tea houses, merchants weighing silver in dim rooms, scholar officials resting their heads on scrolls as sleep and opium blurred the ink before their eyes. This is not a story of battles or shouting generals. It is a quiet unraveling, soft and slow, as a nation drifted into addiction, corruption, and a decline almost too gentle to notice. Tonight, in 4 soothing chapters, we will wander through this fading world. First, we'll drift through everyday life at the height of the Qing Empire, before the smoke settled in. A peaceful rhythm of lantern light, river trade, and quiet confidence. Then we'll follow the calm but determined footsteps of Lin Zexu, the official who tried to save China with letters, ink, and unwavering conscience. Next, we'll explore the physical traces of the Opium Age, the pipes, the dens, the ledgers of silver, artifacts holding the whispers of addiction long after their owners disappeared. And finally, we'll drift into the lives of the social elite, the nobles and rulers whose nights grew hazy, whose wills grew weak, and whose empire quietly slipped from their hands. Each moment slower than the last. Each story just another ripple across still water. And if you close your eyes and fall asleep along the way, that's perfectly fine. History will keep moving softly without you. So breathe deeply. Listen to the quiet heartbeat of a fading empire. And let us begin. How opium addiction destroyed China's Qing Empire forever. Imagine, if you will, the quiet rhythm of a morning in Qing China. The sun has barely risen, a pale amber glow spilling over tiled roofs and narrow lanes. From the mist that clings to the edges of rice paddies, the faint sound of wooden wheels begins. Farmers pushing carts, their steps slow and steady, unhurried in the cool dawn air. This is the early 18th century. The Qing Empire stands serene, confident, and vast. From the far northern steppes to the tropical hills of the south, life follows the same unbroken pattern that it has for centuries. The empire's scholars record the seasons, the merchants tally their accounts, and the farmers tend to their endless rows of grain. In the villages, the mornings begin with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Men and women move through the fields in worn hemp clothing, their wide-brimmed hats casting soft shadows across their faces. Children chase one another near the irrigation ditches, their laughter fading into the distant hum of cicadas. At the center of every settlement stands a small ancestral hall, a low building of brick and wood, its eaves curling like the edges of scroll. Inside, tablets of the dead rest in quiet rows, their carved names glinting faintly in the morning light. Here, the people bow 3 times before beginning their day, murmuring the same family prayers that their ancestors spoke generations ago. The empire's heart beats in these simple rituals. Tea boiled over small clay stoves, rice measured carefully from earthen jars, and roofs patched after each season's rain. In these quiet actions, life feels eternal, unchanging, safe. And yet, beyond the far horizon, change is already coming. In the great cities, where the empire's wealth gathers like a slow river, the rhythm is different. Take Guangzhou, known to foreigners as Canton, where merchant ships from Europe ride the tide up the Pearl River. Here, the narrow streets are lined with stalls of silk, porcelain, and jade. The air smells faintly of tea and salt, of camphor wood and lacquer. Street vendors call out softly, offering dumplings and sweet buns to passing customers. For now, the foreign merchants who arrive each season seem harmless enough. Their strange clothes and languages provoke curiosity more than fear. They bow politely, present gifts, and wait patiently for permission to trade. The Chinese officials, in turn, maintain the old rituals of hierarchy and distance. They see themselves as the gatekeepers of civilization, steady, superior, unyielding. Yet trade is a kind of tide. Once it begins to flow, it never truly stops. Silver moves out of Europe, flowing east in glittering streams. Tea and porcelain move west in return, prized across the world. And in this steady movement of goods, in the quiet counting of coins, the first tiny cracks in the empire's balance begin to form. For now, though, life continues peacefully. In the rural south, a farmer might never hear of foreign traders or distant ports. His world is measured instead by harvests and festivals, by the sound of temple bells and the cycle of rains. In the evenings, families gather around small oil lamps, their light flickering softly against the paper windows. The elders tell stories of emperors and dragons, of virtue and misfortune, while the younger ones doze against the walls, their heads heavy with sleep. The scent of soy and ginger fills the room. Crickets sing outside. Somewhere the dog barks once, then falls silent. The empire seems endless, as though it will last forever. Even the emperors themselves, aloof within their palaces of jade and gold, see the world as steady, well-ordered, and eternal. They hold examinations for scholars, perform the rites of heaven, and issue decrees that ripple outward like the calm circles of a pond. But within this great stillness, something faintly restless stirs. The population is growing. The land, stretched thin, begins to feel the strain. And in the southern ports, where the tides bring ships and whispers from foreign lands, the first traces of something new, something intoxicating, begin to appear. A traveler passing through might not notice it yet. He might see only the beauty, the curved bridges, the bamboo groves, the sound of a distant flute carried on the wind. But beneath that tranquil surface lies an empire too vast, too confident, perhaps too certain of itself. It is a world balanced on the edge of change, serene, yes, but fragile in the way that porcelain is fragile. One touch, one small crack, and the pattern of centuries will begin to shift. So for now, we linger in this peaceful moment. We listen to the hush of distant fields, to the creak of bamboo in the wind. We imagine the comfort of knowing one's place in a world that seems eternal. A world where tea is poured slowly, brushstrokes are made deliberately, and time itself feels endless. But history, like the tide, does not stand still. And before long, that tide will carry with it a strange and fragrant cargo, one that will change everything. Evening settles slowly over the empire. The air cools, carrying the smell of jasmine and whetstone. From the courtyards of Guangzhou, you can hear the gentle ring of a temple bell, its tone drawn out and lingering, as if unwilling to fade into the dark. Lanterns bloom like small suns along the narrow streets, and a soft murmur of voices drifts from tea houses where merchants and sailors rest after another long day of trade. In the quiet of these rooms, deals are struck, not loudly, but in low tones over cups of steaming tea. Most are simple exchanges: porcelain for silver, silk for wool, tea for copper. Yet among the crates and bundles, something new begins to circulate: small, carefully wrapped packages of dried brown resin. Opium, a word that, for most, means nothing yet. A medicine, perhaps, or a curiosity from the distant lands beyond India. Its smoke is said to bring ease, to loosen pain, to fill the body with warmth. The merchants who carry it are discreet. They know the officials forbid its trade, though enforcement is loose and temptation runs deep. After all, Trade in opium is not loud or visible. It is a whisper, a secret exchange under the calm surface of legitimate business. Imagine yourself sitting by a window in one of these houses, the sound of the river outside, the flicker of lamplight on the walls. The merchant across from you unrolls a length of silk, inside of which rests a few small balls of dark opium paste. It smells faintly sweet like dried flowers and smoke. He says little, but his eyes glint with confidence. He knows the value of what he holds. At first, it is the foreigners who bring it, British traders from India, where the poppy fields stretch red and endless under the sun. They load it into their ships, calling it medicine, calling it trade. They understand, far better than their Chinese counterparts, how addiction can shape an economy. For them, this is not about smoke or dreams. It is about silver, profit, and control. And yet, even now, the empire does not notice. The Qing officials in Beijing remain secure behind their walls of ritual and rank. They issue edicts about decorum, about poetry, about the proper behavior of scholars. But the slow poison of commerce is already at work far away, beyond their gaze. The governor of Canton may send a report or two, mentioning foreign medicine or smoking dens appearing along the riverbanks. But such things seem trivial in the great balance of empire. Meanwhile, daily life continues. In the villages, farmers still plant, harvest, and pray. In the cities, students prepare for the imperial examinations, copying ancient texts until their hands ache. The empire still feels whole, as though the mandate of heaven itself rests upon it. But small changes creep in, quiet as dust. In some households, wealthy merchants begin to keep small porcelain pipes, gifts from foreigners or novelties purchased at the docks. The first puffs are taken experimentally, often during long evenings of talk and laughter. The smoke curls upward, soft and fragrant, filling the room with a dreamlike haze. For a moment, time seems to slow. The body grows light. The mind drifts into stillness. It is easy to see why people return to it. In a world of order, duty, and endless repetition, the pipe offers a moment of gentle escape. And yet, that same calm will, in time, erode the very structure that sustains it. Imagine a scholar sitting by lamplight, his brush hovering above a sheet of silk. He pauses, the ink drying slowly, as a thin stream of smoke rises beside him. He is not yet an addict, not yet undone. But his thoughts are already slower, his sense of urgency fading. He tells himself he deserves this moment of ease, that it sharpens his reflection, deepens his poetry. And somewhere, unseen, the empire itself begins to mirror his stillness. Outside, the world grows more connected. The British East India Company expands its hold over India, increasing its production of opium to meet China's secret demand. The flow of silver begins to reverse. For centuries, China had absorbed silver from the world in exchange for its tea and porcelain. Now, the silver flows outward, carried away by foreign traders who smile politely as they count their coins. No one yet calls a crisis. The numbers shift gradually, like the slow rise of tide. But beneath the tranquil rhythms of daily life, the empire is being hollowed from within. A process so slow, so quiet, that even those living through it do not feel it happening. In Guangzhou, a young clerk in an office writes another record of trade, unaware that he is documenting the beginning of a national addiction. In Beijing, a scholar finishes an essay on virtue and order, unaware that the empire's wealth is draining into foreign hands. And somewhere in a fishing village along the coast, a farmer lights a small pipe, watches the smoke curl upward, and feels, for the first time, the strange peace of oblivion. So life continues, calm, measured, and endlessly repeating. The tea is poured. The ink dries. The bells of temples ring across the evening air. And far beyond the horizon, ships heavy with opium are already sailing toward the next port, their sails catching the pale light of another dawn. By the early 19th century, the rhythm of the Qing Empire has shifted, not abruptly, but in ways that are almost imperceptible. Morning still comes with the scent of boiling rice and burning incense. The streets of Guangzhou and Suzhou still hum with the movement of carts and voices. The imperial examinations still summon hopeful scholars to the capital. Yet something quieter, subtler, moves beneath these familiar patterns. It begins with a pipe, a moment of ease after work. It spreads to a friend, a neighbor, a cousin. The habit becomes a custom. The custom becomes a quiet dependency. And soon, even in towns far from the ports, the smoke of opium drifts through the evening air. Imagine a riverside tavern, lit only by oil lamps and the pale glow of the moon outside. Inside, a few men recline on bamboo couches. The room is dim, filled with the soft rustle of fabric and the faint hiss of burning opium. The air is thick, but not unpleasant, sweet, slow, and strangely comforting. Their conversation drifts like the smoke itself, half whispered, half forgotten. In one corner, a scholar debates poetry but forgets his own argument mid-sentence. In another, a merchant hums a tune from his hometown, eyes half closed. For them, this is leisure, a way to forget the fatigue of long days and the pressures of endless duty. But for the empire, this quiet surrender is the first sigh of decline. Outside these rooms, the streets remain orderly. Children still chase each other between market stalls. Women still barter for vegetables and spices. The empire's face, to any passing observer, is calm and disciplined. But look closer, the colors have dulled. Where once there was conversation, there is silence. Where once there was energy, there is stillness that lasts a little too long. The officials who patrol the ports know of it, of course. They confiscate shipments when they can, destroy pipes when they must, and issue proclamations against the trade. Yet these acts feel ceremonial, like sweeping sand from the tide. The merchants have grown clever, their networks complex. They smuggle through river inlets, hide goods in tea crates, and bribe officials whose salaries, stretched thin by corruption and inflation, make resistance difficult. And so the habit grows. It grows among scholars and farmers, among soldiers and servants, among those who should have known better and those who never had a choice. In the evenings, the glow of small lamps flickers in doorways across the empire. Not the golden light of study or prayer, but the dull orange flame of the opium lamp. If you imagine yourself walking down a narrow street at night, you might glimpse these scenes through half-closed doors. A man lying motionless on a mat, a woman gently fanning the smoke away from her sleeping child, an old scholar murmuring poetry that no one will remember. You might hear the faint pluck of a pipa, slow and melancholic, its notes fading into silence. In the capital, word of this reaches the court. Memorials are written, some by earnest reformers, others by those seeking favor, describing moral decay, waste of silver, and the weakness of men. The emperor reads them by lamplight in the stillness of the forbidden city, surrounded by paintings of distant mountains and silent attendants. He sighs and writes a reply filled with virtue and condemnation, ordering renewed vigilance, stricter enforcement. But the decrees flow downward into an ocean too vast to contain. The empire's bureaucracy, once its pride, has grown slow and thick with custom. Reports are delayed, orders softened, punishments reduced. The officials who still care feel helpless. Those who don't simply adapt. And the foreign traders, now more numerous, more daring, watch from their ships, patient as the tide itself. They know the empire cannot shut them out forever. Meanwhile, silver drains steadily away. The coins that once filled the markets of Guangzhou and Beijing are now melted, stamped, and shipped abroad. Taxes become harder to collect, salaries harder to pay. The farmers sense something changing but cannot name it. The merchants know but will not speak of it. The officials sense danger but still hope that ritual, propriety, and a few stern words will restore balance. In one quiet household, a father coughs softly as his teenage son lights the pipe for him. The son watches the smoke rise and wonders what it feels like to drift so calmly. In another home, A widow pawns her last piece of jewelry to buy a small amount of the drug that brings her brief peace from grief and hunger. In yet another, an officer who once commanded 100 men stares at his trembling hands and whispers that he will stop, tomorrow perhaps. Still, life continues. The roosters crow, the bells toll, the markets open. The empire's vast body moves forward, unaware of how heavy its limbs have grown. And the merchants, both foreign and domestic, count their profits in quiet satisfaction. The smoke they sell has no border, no loyalty, no conscience. If you look at a map of the empire at this moment, the rivers winding like veins, the mountains rising like ribs, you might imagine a great, slumbering body. It still breathes, still moves, still dreams of eternity. But inside, the poison is already working its way through the blood. Soon, there will be a reckoning. But not yet. For now, the empire sleeps, serene, beautiful, and unaware that its dreams are slowly dissolving into smoke. Imagine a quiet morning along the riverbanks of Fujian province. Mist drifts above the water, soft and pale, like silk stretched across the sky. In a small home beside the river, a boy named Lin Zexu rises before dawn. His father, a modest scholar, sits cross-legged on a woven mat, brush in hand, copying the words of Confucius onto thin paper. The air smells faintly of ink and damp bamboo. Lin's childhood, like his later life, is marked by discipline. While other children play in the courtyards, Lin sits by the window, repeating phrases from the Analects. To govern oneself is to govern the world. His handwriting is already precise, his voice soft but steady. He listens to the river outside and learns to think of time not as a rush, but as a current, something to be observed, measured, and guided. In these early years, the rhythm of his days is almost monastic. He studies by lamplight, the flame trembling against the wall. He reads aloud until the characters seem to float in the air before him. Each evening, he bows before his ancestors' tablets, as his father whispers that knowledge is a kind of virtue, and virtue, the true root of strength. From this foundation of patience and restraint, Lin Zexu's life begins its slow ascent. By his late teens, he earns high marks in the provincial examinations. Those who read his essays describe his writing as clear and upright, like a bamboo stalk, flexible, yet impossible to corrupt. He speaks little in public, preferring to observe, to listen. Yet when he does speak, his words are deliberate, weighted with care. At the capital, where scholars gather for the imperial examinations, Lin's composure draws attention. The courtyards are filled with hundreds of candidates, each clutching a roll of paper, each reciting lines of the classics in trembling voices. But Lin moves calmly among them, serene as the still water of a pond. When the results are posted, his name stands among the highest. The appointment that follows is humble, a post in the provincial administration. He accepts it without complaint, bowing deeply before his superiors. In the years that follow, he travels through several provinces, serving as magistrate, prefect, and later, governor. Wherever he goes, he earns a quiet reputation for fairness. Villagers remember him not for his speeches, but for his presence, measured, composed, incorruptible. In Fujian, he reforms the tax collection system, ensuring that the poor are not overburdened. In Hubei, he cracks down on banditry, but insists that those captured be treated humanely. He writes poems in the evenings, soft verses about rivers and wind, often reflecting his belief that governance, like nature, must find its balance. The officials around him find his strictness exhausting. He refuses gifts. He refuses flattery. He refuses, even, to bend the rules for convenience. Yet his calm demeanor makes it difficult to resent him. Lin Zexu, one of his colleagues writes, is like cold water poured over heated iron. He does not scald, but he tempers. The empire, by now, has begun to tremble under the weight of its contradictions. Corruption grows like vines across the bureaucracy. Silver flows outward. The foreign traders grow bolder. And the opium smoke that drifts through the homes of the wealthy has reached even the minor gentry. But Lin continues his work as if unaware of the gathering storm, though in truth, he notices everything. He keeps detailed journals, not for publication, but as quiet reflections. In one entry, written during a provincial inspection, he describes seeing a farmer coughing as he lights a small pipe. The smoke, Lin writes, was gentle and fragrant, but the man's hands trembled as though he had seen ghosts. It is strange that something so soft could hold such power. He adds no judgment, no anger, only observation. Yet his awareness deepens with each encounter. By middle age, Lin's reputation has reached the imperial court. The Emperor Daoguang, troubled by reports of rising addiction and moral decay, hears of Lin's integrity. When an official recommends Lin for higher office, the emperor is said to have nodded and replied softly. The people speak his name with trust. That is rare. And so, Lin is summoned to Beijing. He travels north by boat, passing the long stretches of river where the empire's fate has already begun to shift. Along the banks, he sees the same scenes repeated. Men working, women washing clothes, children splashing in the shallows. And yet, in each village, the same faint scent of opium smoke lingers. He breathes it in quietly and does not speak of it. The capital greets him with ceremony. The forbidden city rises like a dream of stone and gold. Officials bow, drums echo faintly across the courtyards. But beneath the grandeur, Lin senses the stillness of a system grown too comfortable, too sure of its own eternity. He kneels before the throne and accepts his new post, Commissioner of the Imperial Household Department, a position that will, within a few short years, lead him directly into the heart of the opium crisis. For now, he remains calm. His letters home are modest, describing the weather, the city's vast libraries, the orderly gardens where scholars stroll in silence. He thanks his father for his early teachings and promises to serve the empire with virtue above all else. He ends one letter with a line that would later define him. To purify the world, one must begin with oneself. Outside, snow begins to fall upon the palace roofs. The bells of the temples ring softly in the distance. Lin Zexu sits by his lamp, brush in hand, and writes another report, measured, careful, honest. He does not yet know that he will soon stand against the tide of a global empire, nor that his calm resolve will become a symbol of resistance for generations. For now, he simply writes, and the ink dries slowly on the page. When Lin Zexu arrives in Guangzhou, the city breathes with the rhythm of trade, a low, constant pulse that never truly rests. The Pearl River moves slowly under a haze of morning mist, and ships from across the seas lie at anchor in the harbor, their flags stirring faintly in the wind. To most, it is a scene of prosperity, warehouses filled with tea, silk, and porcelain, bustling streets echoing with merchants' voices, silver clinking softly in counting houses. But to Lin Zexu, it is something else, a patient infection beneath a beautiful surface. From the moment he takes office as Imperial Commissioner, his days begin before sunrise and end long after the lamps are lit. He studies reports, meets with officials, and walks the docks in silence. The foreign ships appear vast and strange to him. Great wooden walls rising above the water, filled not only with goods, but with men who speak in clipped, unfamiliar tongues. He observes everything. The guarded way the British traders speak of medicine, the evasive glances when opium is mentioned, the nervous laughter of intermediaries who know the truth but will not say it aloud. Lin does not shout nor threaten. That is not his way. Instead, he writes letters, proclamations, reflections, each word chosen with deliberate care, each phrase imbued with the calm certainty of moral conviction. He writes to the merchants, "Heaven has made men to cherish life, not to destroy it. You, by selling poison for profit, defy both heaven and the laws of man." He writes to his subordinates, "Let us not fear the magnitude of this task, for what is right will endure." And to the emperor, he writes with humility, "Your servant will cleanse the sea of this corruption, even if the waves rise against him." In the early weeks of his command, he orders a series of investigations. Local smugglers are questioned. Coastal patrols are reinforced. The warehouses near the river are searched with quiet efficiency. Each day, more opium is found, not just hidden in crates or sealed in jars, but openly traded behind closed doors, protected by bribes and silence. At night, Lin walks along the docks. The foreign factories, those small enclaves where Europeans live and conduct business, glow faintly with lamplight. The air carries the scent of tobacco, salt, and something else. The sweet, heavy trace of opium smoke drifting from the decks of anchored ships. He pauses to listen. The waves lap gently against the hulls, a sound as old as time. He thinks of his homeland, of the rivers and mountains that give life to his people, and of the poison that now seeps through those same veins. By day, he meets the foreign representatives. They bow politely but speak in careful, measured tones. When Lin demands that they cease the opium trade, they answer with evasions, that they cannot control private merchants, that they are bound by commerce, that the demand comes from China itself. Lin listens unmoved. His face remains serene, his words slow and calm. If the demand is the sickness of our people, he says, then the supply is the sickness of yours. His firmness surprises them. For decades, Chinese officials have been content to issue warnings, to accept small bribes, to maintain the illusion of order. Lin Zexu, however, will not yield. He issues a decree. All opium in foreign possession must be surrendered within 3 days. Those who comply will be treated with leniency. Those who resist will be barred from trade and face imperial wrath. The city trembles with tension. Merchants whisper in fear. Foreign ships begin to move nervously within the harbor, their captains uncertain whether to obey or defy. And yet, Lin remains calm, seated at his desk as reports arrive. His brush moves steadily across the paper, recording each event with the same precision as a scholar copying a verse. When the first crates of opium are turned in, he does not gloat. He simply nods and orders them to be cataloged and sealed. By the end of the week, thousands of chests have been surrendered. They fill the warehouses like dark monuments, a mountain of addiction piled before the eyes of the empire. At night, as the lamps burn low, Lin writes again. He writes of moral clarity, of justice, of the need to restore dignity to the empire. His tone is never angry. It is weary, but unwavering. To act is to disturb the still water, he notes in one reflection. But what is the purpose of stillness if the water has already grown foul? His aides grow anxious. They know the foreigners are restless, their governments watchful, their cannons powerful. But Lin Zexu refuses fear. In his mind, the empire's integrity is more sacred than its trade. He dreams, sometimes, of a time before all of this, of quiet rivers and children learning their first characters. And he believes, with the certainty of a man guided by principle, that righteousness will prevail. Outside, the river reflects the moonlight in trembling lines. Somewhere in the harbor, a sailor lights his pipe and inhales, unaware that the world around him is about to change forever. Lin, awake at his desk, continues to write, words that will echo far beyond his lifetime, into history, into legend, and into the quiet dreams of those who still believe in virtue over power. The spring of 1839 arrives like a slow exhale. The rains have ended, and the Pearl River once again glimmers under a pale morning sun. The surrendered opium, more than 20,000 chests, enough to dull the senses of an empire, sits in warehouses near the small coastal town of Human, guarded day and night by imperial troops. Lin Zexu watches in silence as the preparations unfold. His orders are clear, written in calm strokes upon imperial paper. The opium must be destroyed, not sold, not stored, not hidden, destroyed utterly, so that the empire may begin to breathe again. There is no ceremony, no trumpet, no shouting crowd. Only the steady rhythm of workers lifting crates, prying open lids, and pouring the dark, resinous contents into great trenches dug by the shore. The air fills with the scent of brine and bitterness, not unpleasant, but strange, as though the earth itself is exhaling centuries of sorrow. Imagine standing there, the sea wind gentle on your face, the skies soft and cloudless. You would see the men move slowly, methodically, under Lin's watchful eye. Each motion is deliberate, each gesture an act of quiet faith. They pour the opium into long ditches filled with salt water and lime, stirring it with bamboo poles until the mixture froths and darkens. No one speaks above a whisper. Even the sound of the waves seems subdued, respectful. Lin stands slightly apart, his robes fluttering in the sea breeze. He holds his hands clasped behind his back, his face composed but distant. To him, this is not destruction, it is purification. Later, in his report to the emperor, he will describe the act with simple dignity. The poison was washed away by the sea, and thus heaven's purity was restored. The process continues for days. Workers labor from dawn until dusk, their movements steady, unhurried. By the end, the trenches have swallowed nearly 1.2 million kilograms of opium. The water turns thick and dark before it finally drains into the ocean. When the last crate is emptied, the men bow to Lin, who nods once in silent approval. That night, the commissioner writes again. His brush moves slowly, as though weighed by the gravity of what has been done. He does not boast, nor claim triumph. Instead, he reflects. If one does not fear heaven's judgment, one must at least fear the echo of one's own conscience. May this act remind all who see it that moral courage is not noise, but stillness. The foreign merchants, however, are not still. To them, the destruction of opium is not a moral victory, but an economic wound. They send messages across the sea, written in anger and disbelief. They demand compensation, apology, reparation. Their words grow louder, their governments attentive. In London, the incident is soon spoken of not as the cleansing of evil, but as the seizure of British property. Lin Zexu, ever calm, knows this. He is not naive. He understands that his act, though righteous, will not go unanswered. But his letters to the emperor remain free of panic. He writes instead of principle, of Li, the Confucian order of moral duty. He argues that the empire must not yield to greed or fear. If the barbarians seek war for profit, he writes, then we must meet them with virtue, for virtue is the root of strength. In his compound, under the soft glow of lanterns, Lin's aides work in silence. They translate foreign letters, record inventories, and organize defenses. Outside, the sea is calm, but foreign ships begin to gather at its horizon. Somewhere beyond sight, their cannons wait, dark and patient. Within China, Lin's name spreads swiftly. To the common people, he is a hero, a man of iron virtue who has stood against corruption. To the merchants, he is both feared and respected. In tea houses, storytellers begin to recite verses in his honor. He washed away the poison with the sea, and the heavens grew clear. Children repeat his name without fully understanding what it means. And yet, Lin himself feels no pride. In his private writings, he expresses only concern. He knows that foreign powers will not forget the insult, and that the empire, vast though it may be, is unprepared for what may follow. Its soldiers are brave but ill-equipped, its fleets beautiful but outdated, its officials loyal but divided. Still, he believes in the moral weight of his actions. In his mind, there can be no compromise between righteousness and corruption. He writes one final letter to Queen Victoria, not in anger, but in calm appeal. He asks her to imagine the suffering caused by opium in her own land, and to act as a ruler guided by conscience rather than profit. The letter, famously, never reaches her. Days pass, the monsoon winds shift, and in the distance, sails appear, dark against the pale horizon. The British fleet has come to demand satisfaction. Lin Zexu stands at the water's edge and watches as the waves roll toward him. His face remains serene, though the air itself feels heavy, as though the world is holding its breath. For a brief, suspended moment, the sea is calm, the empire still, and Lin's resolve unbroken. Soon, war will come, but for now, there's only the sound of the tide and the soft whisper of the wind through the reeds. Imagine a dim museum gallery, the air cool and still, footsteps softened by carpet. Glass cases stretch in quiet rows, and beneath them lie fragments of another age, delicate, intricate, and heavy with untold stories. Here, under the muted glow of display lights, rests the material memory of China's opium era. The first objects you notice are the opium pipes. They're slender, elegant instruments, more ornate than one might expect. Some are fashioned from ivory, others from bamboo polished to a soft sheen. Their bowls are often made of ceramic or metal, shaped like small lotuses or clouds. To the modern eye, they seem almost beautiful, works of craftsmanship, shaped with patience and precision. But each curve, each engraving, each smooth surface once served a darker purpose. When archaeologists excavate sites from the late Qing period, they often find these pipes buried among broken porcelain, coins, and shards of glass. The earth keeps them safe for a century or more, preserving faint traces of resin within the metal bowls. Under magnification, these traces still bear the chemical fingerprints of opium, a ghostly reminder of smoke long vanished. Holding such an object, one feels a strange, quiet sadness. The pipe is not violent in itself. It is gentle to the touch, smooth and unassuming. But through it pass the dreams, dependencies, and despair of millions. Beside the pipes, there are opium lamps, small, glass-bodied vessels designed to warm the drug before smoking. Their shapes vary. Some resemble oil lamps, others small flasks with a flickering wick. In use, the lamp would glow softly, casting a warm amber light across the room. It is easy to imagine the scene. A low couch, a thin mat, the faint fragrance of burning oil mingling with the sweet heaviness of opium smoke. The glow of the lamp would reflect gently on painted walls, illuminating faces half dreaming, half forgotten. Now, in the stillness of the museum, that light feels distant, almost sacred, an echo of a long night that never fully ended. Further along, you might see lacquered boxes, their surfaces dark and glossy, once used to store opium pellets or paraphernalia. The lacquer, made from tree sap and polished over weeks, has survived better than many other materials. Some boxes are decorated with scenes of scholars reading, mountains rising in mist, or birds perched upon bamboo branches. The contrast is quiet but haunting, objects crafted with beauty to serve a practice that hollowed lives. Archaeologists have also uncovered ledger books and fragments of contracts, written in neat brushstrokes. The ink has faded, but the meaning remains clear. These were records of trade, of loans, of debts paid not in silver, but in opium itself. In small villages, these contracts mark the loss of homes, of freedom, of entire families swallowed by addiction. Each document feels intimate, the handwriting precise, as if the writers still believed order could exist within chaos. Among the relics, there are also paintings, scrolls, and watercolors depicting scenes of 19th century domestic life. In some, scholars recline with pipes beside scrolls of poetry. In others, traders sit behind tables covered in scales and jars. Artists rarely painted the suffering directly. Instead, they hinted at it. Through drooping postures, half-closed eyes, the weary slant of a brushstroke. The sadness is subtle, the kind that seeps in slowly, like a fog over water. Even in written records, the tone was often restrained. Officials described the spread of addiction in careful, almost poetic language. They wrote of clouded minds and hearts turned inward by smoke. Missionaries noted the quiet despair of those who could not stop. Yet even they used gentle metaphors, as though to soften what was too heavy to confront directly. In excavation reports from the Pearl River Delta in northern Jiangsu, researchers describe layers of soil rich with the remnants of this era. Not just pipes and lamps, but fragments of imported goods, porcelain marked with British insignia, and coins from India. The ground itself tells a story of exchange, both cultural and chemical. Opium was not merely a commodity. It was a bridge of dependency between two worlds, one of silk and tea, the other of iron and industry. Today, conservators clean these relics with the utmost care. They wear gloves and use fine brushes, each movement deliberate, respectful. They do not treat these artifacts as symbols of shame, but as witnesses, silent, unjudging. Each object speaks in its own language of texture and patina, of hands that once held it, of lives shaped by it. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine the past as a quiet dreamscape, a scholar's study faintly lit by lamplight, the steady sound of the brush as he writes. Outside, the wind rustles bamboo leaves. Inside, the air grows thick and thought gives way to haze. Moments later, there is only stillness, the same stillness that now fills the museum centuries later. Opium's story is not only of destruction. It is also of craftsmanship, trade, and the fragile beauty of human habit. The pipes and lamps, though relics of loss, also speak to a culture's enduring artistry, its ability to shape beauty even from sorrow. And perhaps, in that quiet duality, lies the reason these artifacts still draw us in. They remind us that history, like smoke, never truly disappears. It lingers soft and weightless in the folds of time. Imagine the world as it was 2 centuries ago. Oceans vast and uncertain, ships slow and deliberate, and ports alive with the rhythm of trade. From London to Calcutta, from the Pearl River to the South China Sea, a silent network of exchange linked people, products, and ideas. It is within this vast, measured web that opium flowed, not as a symbol of evil, but as a thread woven quietly through the fabric of global history. When archaeologists study these routes, they do not begin with battles or treaties. They begin with objects, fragments of porcelain found along Indian shores, shards of British glass bottles near Chinese riverbanks, and coins stamped with faraway kings discovered deep in inland provinces. Each artifact tells a story of movement, of contact, of gradual transformation. In India, in the fertile lands of Bihar and Bengal, excavations near old warehouses reveal traces of clay pipes, storage jars, and ledgers. Here, British colonial records meet physical remains. Scales used to weigh raw opium, ink pots once held by East India Company clerks, and fragments of sealing wax used to close chests before shipment. The air, even now, feels heavy with the memory of commerce, a calm, yet unrelenting tide that carried wealth one way and weakness the other. Further east, in Southeast Asia, underwater archaeologists explore shipwrecks along the coasts of Malaysia and Vietnam. In the dark, cool silence of the seabed, they find the ghosts of trade, crates of porcelain, iron bars, beads, and sometimes small containers that once held processed opium. The ocean has preserved them in its quiet depths, objects wrapped in layers of silt, sleeping in peace. When lifted to the surface, they reveal faint traces of their journey. Barnacles, salt stains, the soft green patina of time. Imagine a single ship departing from Calcutta in 1835. Its hull is packed with chests of opium, sealed and marked with red ink. On the upper decks, bales of cotton and sacks of rice provide ballast. The crew moves in rhythm, guided by wind and tide, their days measured by the sun's slow passage. Weeks later, the same ship approaches Canton, its cargo unchanged, its purpose unspoken. No weapons, no soldiers, only merchants and a trade that reshaped empires without a single cannon fired, at least for a while. Archaeology reveals that this network was not purely mechanical. It carried ideas, languages, and habits as well. Chinese coins have been found in Indian marketplaces, while Indian fabrics appeared in southern China long before opium became common. In these small exchanges, one sees the gradual softening of boundaries, a world where commerce traveled faster than understanding. At coastal temples near Fujian and Guangdong, offerings from this era tell another story. Archaeologists have uncovered incense burners shaped like ships, carved in gratitude for safe voyages. Inside their stone altars lie small silver ingots and British trade tokens, offerings made by sailors who believed the gods could protect both their souls and their cargo. The mingling of faith and trade becomes evident, religion adapting quietly to commerce, ritual absorbing the language of profit. Even inland, traces of the trade survive. In caravan routes stretching toward Yunnan and Tibet, small clay seals have been unearthed, embossed with the Chinese character for medicine. Some scholars believe these were once attached to packets of opium transported through the mountains, passed hand to hand by traders who understood its value but not its consequence. Each seal, no larger than a coin, represents a step in a long, winding path, a chain of exchange stretching across valleys, rivers, and time itself. In museum archives, historians examine maps drawn by 19th century navigators. Their lines are neat and precise, routes across the Indian Ocean, dotted with islands and ports. But the simplicity of those lines conceals the complexity of the world they describe. Each port, each anchorage, was a meeting point of cultures, a temporary home to sailors from distant lands. In their journals, they describe strange languages, unfamiliar foods, and the soft glow of Chinese lanterns reflected on the water at night. To them, opium was just another commodity, one of many traded for silk, porcelain, or silver. Today, when archaeologists open forgotten warehouses or excavate riverbanks, they find not only artifacts, but layers of emotion preserved in dust. The faint smell of wood once soaked with resin. The impression of a crate long decayed, but still outlined in soil. Even the smallest discovery, a coin, a shard, a seal, becomes a whisper of human touch. It is easy to see opium's story as a tale of tragedy, but in the quiet light of archaeology, it becomes something gentler, a study of connection, of how distant lives brushed against one another across oceans. Each relic, however humble, reflects both loss and understanding. A fragment of porcelain tells us of tea ceremonies and trade routes. A pipe bowl tells us of habit and hope. A coin speaks of value, but also of belief. The belief that what is exchanged can bring prosperity, if not peace. When viewed together, these remains form a map not of power, but of persistence. The world has always been connected, not by empire alone, but by curiosity, need, and the quiet continuity of trade. And though the ships that carried opium are long gone, their traces remain, beneath sand, beneath water, and within the soft folds of memory that history never quite lets go. When the smoke cleared, not from a single room, but from an entire century, what remained was not only loss, but a strange, quiet beauty. History, after all, does not vanish, it transforms. And in China, the memory of opium seeped gently into art, poetry, and ritual, where it found a second life, not in defiance, but in reflection. In old collections of Qing Dynasty poetry, one can still find verses written by scholars and officials who witnessed the opium era firsthand. Their words are measured, deliberate, and soft. Lamentations written not with anger, but with weary compassion. One poet compares the drifting of smoke to the vanishing of integrity. The mind once clear now mirrors the mist. Virtue dissolves like incense in the wind. Another writes of sleepless nights, when the moonlight falls across an empty pipe, and the silence feels heavier than any addiction. Even in painting, the influence of opium lingers, subtle, never direct. Artists of the late 19th century began to favor muted colors, long brushstrokes, and hazy horizons. The mountains became softer, the clouds more uncertain. Figures reclined rather than stood. There was no overt message, only a shared quietness, as if the artists themselves were exhaling grief in ink and pigment. In Shanghai, during the twilight of the Qing era, new art forms began to merge with the old. Lithographs and prints depicted opium dens not as scenes of horror, but of melancholy, domesticity. A man lies on a couch, his robe loose, his expression serene. A woman watches with distant eyes. The lamp glows faintly between them. These images, though still and silent, capture something that words cannot: the stillness of surrender, the poetry of fatigue. Archaeologists studying the remnants of these studios often find small dishes of pigment stained with soot, a quiet trace of the environment in which such art was made. The air would have been thick, the windows veiled, the world outside distant. And yet, even in those dim rooms, creativity persisted. It is one of the paradoxes of history. Beauty often survives where joy does not. In literature, too, the shadow of opium found expression. Novels of the late Qing describe scholars torn between duty and decadence, merchants seeking solace in smoke, families crumbling under quiet despair. Yet even here, the tone is rarely harsh. Writers approach their subjects with sympathy, describing addiction not as wickedness, but as weakness, the slow erosion of will beneath the weight of circumstance. To read these works is to feel the pulse of humanity beneath decline, the shared fragility of people caught between worlds. Opium also entered the language of symbolism. In paintings, poppies appeared beside wilting lotus flowers. The two plants, both beautiful and transient, play side by side as if to remind viewers of life's delicate balance. In poetry, smoke became a metaphor for memory, rising and fading, never quite gone. Even incense, used for centuries in temples and homes, began to carry a quieter resonance, its fragrance no longer only sacred, but tinged with sorrow. Ritual adapted too. In some southern villages, families once held small ceremonies to banish the smoke after a relative overcame addiction. Simple offerings, a bowl of rice, a cup of tea, and a lamp, were placed before the family altar. The act was gentle, almost private, a recognition that even within ruin, there could be redemption. Modern historians and conservators sometimes speak of these artifacts with reverence, as though they carry not only the memory of destruction, but of endurance. The lacquered boxes, the carved pipes, the faded paintings, all have survived the rise and fall of dynasties, wars, revolutions, and reforms. Their beauty, though dimmed, has not disappeared. To study them is to sense a slow heartbeat under centuries of silence. Museums today often display these works beside quiet panels of text. Visitors move slowly, their reflections gliding across the glass. There are no loud sounds, no digital screens flashing, only stillness. Perhaps in that silence, people feel a trace of what the artists once felt, the yearning to capture what cannot be undone, to make peace with what remains. The cultural legacy of opium is thus both tender and tragic. It reminds us that history is not just about power or defeat, but about the resilience of human expression. Where war leaves ruins, art leaves whispers. Where pain silences speech, poetry finds a way to speak softly. And where memory fades, ritual preserves what the heart cannot bear to forget. So the story continues, in calligraphy, in paintings, in a lingering scent of ink and dust. In every quiet stroke of a brush, there lies both mourning and acceptance. And as we gaze upon those old works, framed beneath museum light, we are reminded that even sorrow can be gentle, and even decline can be beautiful when seen through the lens of time. In every era, luxury and poverty exist side by side, like two mirrors reflecting the same world from opposite ends. In Qing China, during the height of the Opium Age, this contrast was particularly profound. The same substance that lulled emperors in a fragile serenity also emptied the bowls of peasants. The same smoke that drifted lazily through marble halls curled through the rafters of mud brick homes. Imagine first the life within the imperial court. The forbidden city, vast and silent, glimmers under the pale sun. Beyond its crimson walls, the world grows restless, but within, time seems to move differently, slow and ceremonial. Courtiers shuffle through corridors lined with carved beams. Servants whisper as they carry trays of tea. Silk robes rustle softly against the polished stone floors. And somewhere, in a secluded chamber scented with sandalwood and lotus, a high-ranking official reclines on a couch, a thin plume of smoke curling from a silver pipe. To those within the palace, opium was not merely a habit, it was refinement. It accompanied poetry readings, music, and long hours of philosophical conversation. The pipes themselves were art, ivory inlaid with jade, bowls of gold filigree, lamps crafted from crystal and brass. Everything moved in rhythm, slow, deliberate, serene. The drug's touch was described not as intoxication, but as tranquility, a momentary dissolution of worldly care. Visitors from abroad, granted rare glimpses of the imperial lifestyle, often remarked on its stillness. One British envoy, writing home, described the palace as a kingdom of clouds, beautiful, weightless, and distant from the earth. He could not have known how literal that description would become. Within those clouds of smoke lay the quiet erosion of clarity, a slow surrender not to pleasure, but to inertia. Meanwhile, far beyond the capital's walls, another world persisted. In small river towns, laborers worked through long days, hauling goods, fishing, weaving silk, or tending rice fields under a sun that gave no mercy. At night, some found solace in the same opium that adorned the tables of the elite. But theirs was not an art of luxury. It was a release from pain, hunger, and fatigue. They smoked not from pipes of ivory, but from bamboo tubes blackened by years of use. Their lamps were simple, their rooms dim, their dreams no less vivid. Imagine a humble inn near the docks of Guangzhou. The air is thick with the scent of salt, oil, and distant rain. A group of sailors gathers in a corner, their faces lit by the small glow of a lamp. They share a pipe, speaking little, their voices low and measured. Outside, waves lap softly against the pier. There is no wealth here, no grandeur, only quiet exhaustion. Yet, in that moment, the stillness is the same as in the palace. The same smoke, the same escape, the same illusion of peace. Archaeological excavations reveal this duality with striking clarity. In elite tombs, opium paraphernalia, made of jade and gold, are found beside fine porcelain. In rural graves, similar items appear, but crafted from clay and tin. Across class lines, the object remains, humble or ornate, a shared symbol of both comfort and decline. Social records from the late 18th and early 19th centuries tell the same story in quieter language. Officials warned of farmers selling their tools to afford small quantities of opium. Merchants wrote of profits rising while productivity fell. Even physicians, who once prescribed opium in moderation, began to lament its overuse. Their notes describe patients dreaming through daylight, their hands too weak to work the soil. Yet, through it all, the court remained detached, its ministers continuing to smoke as they debated policy meant to halt the very habit they themselves could not abandon. In literature and folk songs of the time, this contrast appears again and again. One poem, recorded by a village teacher, begins gently. The emperor's smoke rises with incense. The farmer's smoke rises with hunger. Another verse, sung by boatmen on the Yangtze, speaks of the river that carries both silver and sorrow. The tone is not angry, only resigned, an acknowledgement that the world is uneven and that comfort and despair often share the same current. Even the architecture of the time reflected this division. In Beijing, opulent chambers filled with scrolls, lacquer screens, and carved furniture absorbed the scent of perfumed smoke. In the countryside, homes built of packed earth carried the same scent, but mixed with the smell of labor, of rice straw, clay, and the faint bitterness of smoke clinging to clothes. Two worlds, one habit. Two classes, one quiet surrender. Historians often describe this era as a moment when indulgence replaced vigilance. The empire, vast and wise, had grown introspective, wrapped in the silks of its own comfort. The people, burdened and weary, sought small escapes in the same vapor that dulled their rulers. And between them flowed the steady rhythm of dependency, gentle, invisible, unstoppable. If you close your eyes and listen, you can almost hear it. The distant murmur of court musicians blending with the rhythmic creak of fishing boats. Two melodies, rising and fading together. The song of a nation drifting slowly between wakefulness and dream. There are moments in history when change comes not with noise, but with silence. The fall of the Qing elite was one such moment. A decline not marked by a single battle, but by the steady thinning of will, the quiet erosion of purpose, the slow unraveling of belief beneath a haze of smoke and silver. In the early decades of the 19th century, the empire still shimmered on the surface. Magnificent palaces, ritual parades, scholars debating the nature of virtue and harmony. But beneath that polished exterior, the foundations had begun to soften. Silver flowed out of China in vast quantities, traded for opium brought by foreign merchants. Every pipe lit in a palace chamber or riverside shack represented a few more coins leaving the treasury, a few more links lost from the economic chain that had once bound the empire together. The British East India Company had long studied the habits of the Chinese market. Tea, silk, porcelain, these were treasures the world desired, yet the Qing government demanded payment only in silver. It was a policy that had preserved China's wealth for centuries. But the British found an answer to this imbalance. Opium. Grown in India, shipped across seas, it flowed steadily into southern ports like Canton, hidden at first, then tolerated, and finally, uncontrollable. The empire's defenses were not armies or walls, but morals, and those too began to weaken. At the top of this crumbling hierarchy, the court debated endlessly. Some ministers urged harsh restrictions. Others, quietly dependent themselves, spoke of tolerance. Edicts were written, torn, rewritten. Smugglers were arrested and replaced. Officials were sent to enforce bans, only to find themselves tempted by the very substance they were ordered to destroy. The rhythm of decay was soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic, like the faint tapping of raindrops against a roof that no one bothered to mend. In the midst of this confusion stood Lin Zexu, a man of rare integrity. When he was appointed imperial commissioner in 1839, he sought to end the trade with unwavering determination. He wrote letters to Queen Victoria herself, appealing to morality and fairness. He ordered foreign merchants to surrender their opium stockpiles, and when they refused, he acted. Tens of thousands of chests of opium were seized and destroyed at Human, their contents poured into the sea under the pale southern sun. The act was deliberate, solemn, almost ritualistic, a cleansing of corruption through water and will. But the waves that carried away the smoke would soon return as ships of war. The First Opium War began quietly, as most wars do, with words and hesitation. But it ended with thunder. British gunboats, sleek and heavily armed, advanced up the Chinese coast. The Qing armies, bound by tradition and outdated weaponry, could not resist. Cities that had stood for centuries opened their gates. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 forced China to cede Hong Kong, open ports to foreign trade, and pay heavy indemnities. The empire, once the world's central kingdom, found itself humbled, not by invasion alone, but by the internal surrender that had come long before. Within the Forbidden City, the news of defeat drifted through corridors like smoke. The emperor's counselors whispered of balance and renewal, yet their voices were thin and tired. Some turned back to their pipes, seeking comfort in the familiar embrace of forgetfulness. Others turned to poetry, recording laments about the sea that returns what pride once sent away. And beyond the palace walls, the common people watched foreign soldiers march through ports that had once been proudly closed to the world. The foreign presence changed everything, though not all at once. Churches and factories appeared where temples once stood. Foreign merchants built homes that overlooked harbors filled with new kinds of ships. Missionaries brought strange languages, strange beliefs, and medicines that competed with local remedies. Yet even as new influences spread, the haze of opium remained. It softened resistance, blunted ambition, and lulled a wounded nation into uneasy acceptance. Among the elite, the old rituals continued, though their meaning faded. Banquets were still held, poems still composed, incense still burned. But behind every ceremony lay the knowledge that something irreversible had begun. The empire's confidence, once as vast as its borders, now seemed fragile, a glass surface trembling before the wind. For ordinary citizens, change was more immediate. Prices rose as silver drained away. Farmers who once relied on steady coin found their earnings worth less with each passing season. Families that had smoked for comfort now smoked for survival. The line between leisure and dependence blurred until it vanished altogether. And so, from the court to the countryside, the same quiet rhythm continued. The lighting of a pipe, the exhale of a sigh, the slow forgetting of what once was. Looking back, historians often wonder whether the empire could have recovered, whether another path might have led to renewal. But the truth, as always, is more complex. The Qing Dynasty did not fall overnight. It drifted downward, carried by invisible currents of trade, habit, and pride. And when it finally touched the ground, it did so softly, the sound of silk folding, not swords clashing. The foreign powers would remain, their presence growing year by year, shaping the future of China in ways both visible and unseen. But in this moment, in the mid-19th century, all was still. The smoke lingered over harbors, over fields, over the palace roofs glazed with yellow tile. And in that stillness, a civilization turned inward, uncertain whether it was dreaming or merely refusing to wake. As the 19th century faded into the 20th, the great Qing Empire, once radiant and immense, grew dim like the final ember of a long-burning fire. Its palaces still stood, golden under the pale Beijing sun. Its ceremonies continued, precise and slow. But within those vast courtyards, the echoes had changed. The empire no longer whispered of eternity. It murmured of exhaustion. The opium that once marked privilege and leisure had become a symbol of weakness. Foreign powers, entrenched in treaty ports and concessions, no longer needed to force the empire open. It stood ajar, its will eroded. In cities like Shanghai, Tianjin, and Guangzhou, modern life crept in quietly. Telegraph wires stretched over ancient streets. Bicycles rattled past sedan chairs, and Western medicines began to compete with traditional remedies. And still, in narrow alleys and shaded courtyards, the faint aroma of opium lingered. By the 1870s, the government had issued countless bans, each one softer than the last. New officials, new edicts, new reformers rose and fell, their words drifting through the bureaucracy like leaves on still water. For every opium den closed, another reopened. The pipes were not only instruments of addiction. They were symbols of habit, both personal and political. And habits, like dynasties, do not break easily. In the grand homes of fading aristocrats, life continued in muted luxury. Banquets were held, but the dishes grew fewer. Musicians played, but fewer guests listened. Sometimes a scholar would rise and recite a poem from an older age, a verse about mountains, rain, or fleeting dreams. Those who listened would nod, eyes half closed, and for a moment forget that the empire outside was dissolving. History, in those rooms, felt suspended, a long sigh stretched across decades. Outside the palaces, the mood was different. China's population was growing rapidly. Land was scarce. Floods and famines swept through provinces like slow-moving shadows. As the world modernized, many young Chinese began to question the old order. Some joined reform movements, inspired by new ideas from Japan and the West. Others, unable to imagine a different future, turned back to the same solace their parents had known. The curling smoke that promised nothing and asked for nothing. Archaeological reports describe the objects left behind from these years. Porcelain bowls with traces of burnt residue, opium lamps blackened by use, and small wooden boxes decorated with faded characters, sometimes a poem, sometimes a name. Each item tells a quiet story: a family trying to forget hunger, a scholar mourning a lost post, a laborer ending his day in numb tranquility. They are not grand artifacts, but they are deeply human, and in their ordinariness lies the true weight of history. The empire's final decades unfolded like a dream's slow descent. The Boxer Rebellion in 1900 brought chaos, but even in rebellion, opium persisted, traded secretly in every camp. The Empress Dowager Cixi, long a symbol of imperial continuity, grew old amid walls heavy with memory. By the time the revolution of 1911 arrived, ending 2 millennia of dynastic rule, the nation was ready to wake. Though the waking was uneasy, like rising after too long in sleep. In those first years of the Republic, reformers declared an end to the opium trade. Campaigns were organized, pamphlets distributed, and arrests made. Photographs from the early 1900s show public burnings of opium. Crowds gathered as flames consumed the powder that had shaped their history. But even then, the habit lingered, not in defiance, but in memory. For many, the smoke had become a companion, a rhythm of life too deeply woven to unravel overnight. In literature and art, the tone of this new era was wistful. Writers looked back on the Qing not with anger, but with melancholy affection. Painters began to depict not the haze of indulgence, but the clarity of loss. Scrolls showed empty rooms, unlit lamps, wilted flowers, symbols of a world that had quietly exhaled its last breath. And in these works, opium became not merely a subject, but a metaphor. The empire itself, once vibrant, now adrift in its own reverie. Imagine standing at dawn on a Beijing street in 1912. The air is cool, and the first light touches the rooftops of the Forbidden City. A rickshaw passes, its wheels crunching softly on the stone. In the distance, the bells of a temple sound, slow and hollow. The dynasty has ended, yet life continues. Merchants open their stalls. Children chase one another through the dust. A man in a dark coat lights his morning pipe. The empire has fallen, but the world remains. Historians sometimes describe this transition as awakening, yet it was not sudden. China stirred slowly, stretching limbs stiff from centuries of ritual. The new republic struggled to find balance, its people carrying the weight of both sorrow and endurance. And amid this, the memory of opium endured as both warning and echo, a reminder that even the strongest civilizations can drift when the will to change is dulled by comfort. The last of the Qing nobles lived out their days quietly, their palaces turned to museums, their gardens overgrown. Some of them, it is said, still smoked, though not from luxury, rather from longing. To them, the smoke was the last familiar shape of a vanished world. And when they exhaled, it carried with it the faint shimmer of 1,000 years of empire, fading into the morning air. In time, China would move forward scarred but awake. The nation would modernize, rebuild, and reclaim its strength. But even today, in poems and archives, in stories told in whispers, the memory of opium remains, not as blame, but as reflection. It reminds us that history, like smoke, is never entirely gone. It rises, fades, and lingers in the air, quiet, invisible, and endlessly human. And so, our long journey drifts to its end, a story carried by smoke and silence, across centuries and seas. From the glittering courts of the Qing emperors to the shadowed rooms of forgotten towns, the tale of opium and empire unfolds like a slow-moving dream, delicate, sorrowful, and strangely serene. You have traveled tonight through time and memory, through palaces and riverbanks, through loss and endurance. Perhaps you can still picture the gentle hands of an artisan polishing an ivory pipe, or the quiet breath of a scholar exhaling into lamplight. Perhaps you can still imagine the gray waters of the Pearl River, reflecting the last glow of sunset as the waves carry secrets toward the horizon. These are the moments history leaves behind, faint, weightless, yet somehow enduring. The Qing Dynasty, for all its grandeur, reminds us that strength and stillness are not the same, that even the mightiest walls can crumble, not through violence, but through the soft persistence of neglect and habit. Yet, it also reminds us that humanity endures, that art, poetry, and quiet resilience survive even when empires do not. Tonight, as you rest, you might think of that rhythm, the rhythm of history, like the rhythm of breath, rising, falling, fading, returning. Each age exhales its stories into the air, and we, centuries later, breathe them in again. Gentle lessons carried forward, softened by time. If this calm storytelling helped you find a little peace tonight, I invite you to linger here. You can like the video, but only if it truly brought you rest. You can subscribe if you wish to travel with me again through the quieter corners of history, through ruins and rituals, myths and memories. And tell me, softly in the comments below, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? There's something comforting in knowing that across oceans and cities, others too are drifting to sleep to the same stories, the same gentle voice, the same slow current of the past. So now, let the story settle. Let the noise of the world grow distant. Breathe slowly as the last echoes of the empire fade into the hush of night. You are here, in the present, safe and warm, surrounded not by marble halls or ancient wars, but by the quiet hum of modern peace. The lights dim, the world stills. Another chapter closes, not with an ending, but with rest. Thank you for joining me, here on Sleepy Historian, where boring history becomes a soft lullaby for the weary mind, a place for gentle sleep, quiet reflection, and calm curiosity. Until next time, rest well. Let the past fade like smoke, and let the silence of history carry you into dreams.